She called my track inspections a waste of diesel. I held the only FRA certification, keeping 1,100 miles of freight rail legal. 47 missed calls. 112 texts. Most from numbers I'd known for decades. Frank Cooper, Dale Stafford, 2 from Roy Beckstead's personal cell. 1 from the FRA regional office in Kansas City. I was sitting on my back deck in Salina, Kansas, watching the wheat fields go gold in the last light of a Tuesday evening. Carol brought the phone out to me. The work phone, the one I hadn't turned on in 31 days. She set it on the arm of my chair, the way you'd set down something that belonged to someone else. I looked at the screen, looked at the wheat, set the phone face down and picked up my coffee. Stanley Thermos, olive green, the pour top kind. Bought it at the PX at Fort Riley 28 years ago. Carol tried to replace it once. I pulled it out of the trash without saying a word. She never tried again. Let me tell you how we got here. My name is Roy Cantwell. I'm 52 years old. I spent 26 years at Great Plains Shortline Railroad, a privately held freight carrier operating 1,100 miles of track across 5 Midwestern states: Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Iowa, Missouri. We hauled $1.8 billion in annual grain, fertilizer, and crude oil shipments. Every bushel of wheat, every ton of fertilizer, every barrel of crude that moved on our rail moved because someone inspected the track it rolled on. That someone was me. Before Great Plains, I spent nearly a decade in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Enlisted at 17 with my father's signature on the consent form. Made staff sergeant. Heavy construction and infrastructure inspection. Bridges, roads, hardened structures. Deployed to Iraq in 2003 for route clearance and infrastructure assessment. My specialty was knowing when something was about to fail before it did. A hairline crack in a concrete span. A shifting foundation under a culvert. A road surface that looked fine to everyone else, but felt wrong under my boots. I learned to trust that feeling. It kept people alive. I started at Great Plains as a track laborer at 26, the week after my discharge papers cleared. Worked every position on the property. Gang foreman, section supervisor, division engineer, before becoming chief track inspector. I hold a Federal Railroad Administration personal track inspector certification. That's not a company badge. It's a federal authorization issued to a specific individual based on 10 years of qualifying field experience and a personal track record reviewed by the FRA itself. They issued it to me, not to Great Plains, based on what I'd built. 19 consecutive years without a single derailment under my inspection authority. 19 years, 1,100 miles. Not one. You want to know what that costs a man? It costs 4:30 a.m. alarms, 6 days a week, 52 weeks a year. It costs a high rail truck bouncing along rail joints in January when the wind chill hits -15 and the ballast dust freezes to your face. It costs coming home smelling like creosote and diesel with grit in your teeth. Your wife running a bath while you sit at the kitchen table entering inspection data by hand because the company never bought you the software. It costs your knees, your lower back, and a hearing loss in your left ear from 26 years of locomotive horns at close range. It costs your son's high school graduation. Tyler, he's 24 now, journeyman lineman for Evergy, does just fine. He graduated on a Saturday in May. I was 140 miles west on the McPherson subdivision, standing over a Class 2 defect on a curve that carried 40 million gross tons of grain a year. A cracked joint bar. 2 bolts sheared clean. If that rail let go under a loaded unit train, you're looking at 100 cars of Kansas wheat in a ditch and an environmental cleanup that shuts down the line for 6 months. The grain rush was 72 hours out. I couldn't leave. Megan, she's 21, senior at K-State studying agricultural economics. She sent me a photo from the ceremony. Tyler in his cap and gown, Carol beside him, both of them smiling. I taped it to my truck dash. It's still there. 7 years now, the adhesive is part of the plastic. Carol never said a word about it. She understood. That's the thing about being married 27 years to a woman who gets it. She doesn't have to say it. She just makes sure you see the photo when you reach for the thermos every morning. That was the life. The invisible work. Walking 1,100 miles of track across 5 states, measuring rail gauge to the thousandth of an inch, checking tie condition, inspecting every switch and grade crossing, filing the reports that kept the FRA satisfied, and the trains running at speed. Nobody sees it. Nobody thanks you. The phone doesn't ring when everything works. It only rings when it doesn't. And for 19 years, it didn't ring. Then, Jessica Poole showed up. 5 months before she fired me, Roy Beckstead, the man who built Great Plains from a 200-mile feeder line into an 1,100-mile network, the man I'd worked for since I was 26 years old, put his niece in as chief operating officer. He was 71. His health was going. His own kids didn't want the business, so he gave the keys to his brother's daughter. She was 25, Columbia MBA, graduated 14 months prior. Her entire professional experience before Great Plains was 8 months as a supply chain analytics associate at a company that shipped sneakers. Not logistics, not freight, not rail, sneakers. She arrived in a white BMW X5, leased temporary Kansas plates, never been on a gravel road, and parked it in the spot closest to the office door. The spot the track crews had used for the equipment truck for as long as anyone could remember. Nobody said anything. Frank Cooper looked at me. I looked at Frank. We went back to work. Her first week, she walked the Salina yard in boots that still had the tags on the soles. Designer glasses she didn't need. Manicured nails that had never touched a rail, a tie plate, or a piece of ballast. She carried a tablet everywhere, loaded with dashboards she'd built herself, color-coded, measuring things that had nothing to do with moving freight. She found me at the maintenance shop. I was reviewing the quarterly inspection filings with Frank. Roy, I want to understand your utilization metrics. I explained my inspection schedule. Mandated by the FRA, mapped to track class and tonnage, filed quarterly, every mile documented. Every defect logged, classified, and tracked to resolution. She glanced at her tablet, didn't look at my paperwork. So you drive around in a truck and look at the ground. I said, that's one way to describe it. She didn't laugh, didn't blink, pushed those glasses up her nose and walked out. Her cologne hung in the maintenance shop for 10 minutes after she left. Frank opened the bay door to air the place out. Over the next 4 months, she cut my inspection budget twice. First, the overtime. The hours my crew needed to cover the remote subdivisions in Nebraska and Oklahoma, the ones you can't reach in a standard shift. Then, the diesel allocation. She looked at what it cost to run a high rail truck across 5 states for a year. $400,000. All in, diesel, overtime, equipment, and decided it was waste. I flagged 31 track segments needing repair, broken rail joints, compromised tie plates, gauge widening on curves that carried loaded unit trains, ballast failures on grades. Everyone documented. Everyone filed with the division office. Everyone sent to Jessica's inbox. Everyone deferred. We're reallocating to the rebranding initiative. I put it in writing. Emailed Dale Stafford, the general counsel. Emailed Beckstead's personal assistant. No response. I printed the emails and put them in a manila folder in my desk drawer. Habit from the Army. You document everything, because someday someone's going to ask what happened, and the paper is the only thing that doesn't lie. Jessica wore AirPods during the safety briefings. Frank was explaining rail defect classifications to 2 new hires. She sat in the back, scrolling her tablet like it was background noise. Frank caught my eye across the room. I gave him nothing, just kept going. Tuesday, 4:10 p.m., October. Jessica's office, the one she'd had built by converting the old dispatch room Roy Beckstead used for 40 years. Glass walls now. New furniture. A brand mood board where the framed photo of the original 200-mile route map used to hang. Beckstead had kept that map on the wall since the day he laid the first rail. Gone. Janet Ellis from HR stood behind Jessica, holding a tablet, not making eye contact. Jessica didn't stand. We're eliminating the track inspection program as a standalone function. It's a waste of diesel and overtime. We'll be outsourcing compliance going forward. I knew what outsourcing FRA qualified track inspection actually required. 12 to 18 months to certify a vendor, minimum, assuming you could find one, for a 1,100-mile short line in 5 rural states. I said nothing about that. I looked at the wall where Beckstead's route map used to be. The mood board had color swatches, teal and charcoal. A tagline, moving the heartland forward. You're being terminated effective today. HR will process your severance. I stood up, picked up my hard hat from the chair beside me, the same one I'd worn for 9 years. Company logo almost sanded off from brushing against rail cars and bridge timbers and the roof of my truck cab. I held it by the brim. Your railroad. I walked out, didn't look back. The door to the maintenance shop was propped open as I passed. Frank Cooper was standing there, built like a fence post, hands permanently calloused. 18 years under my supervision. Our eyes met. His jaw was tight. I gave him one nod. He gave me one back. I drove my F250 out of the yard for the last time. White, crew cab, 247,000 miles. Toolbox bolted to the bed. High-vis vest on the passenger seat. Ballast dust in the floor mats that no amount of vacuuming would ever get out. Paid off for 8 years. It was October. Indian summer. Warm enough for the windows down. Leaves turning gold along the tree line outside Salina. The sky was enormous and empty, the way it always is in central Kansas, the way it's been every day of my life here. The rail yard shrank in my mirror. The grain elevator stood against the horizon like it always had. I drove home, windows down, radio off, just the wind and the road and the wheat going gold in the last light. Carol was on the porch when I pulled in. She looked at me. Looked at the hard hat on the passenger seat. She didn't ask a single question. She just held the screen door open. For the first time in 26 years, I didn't set an alarm. Wednesday morning. I woke up at 6:47. Sunlight already cutting across the bedroom ceiling. Carol's side of the bed was empty. She'd left for the school at 6:15, same as always. I lay there for a full minute, listening to nothing. No locomotive horn, no dispatch radio, no phone buzzing with overnight track reports, just the house settling and the coffee pot clicking off in the kitchen. I got up, poured from the Stanley thermos Carol had filled before she left, walked out to the back deck. Sat in the wooden chair I'd built when Tyler was small. The joints were loose now, but it held. The wheat fields stretched flat to the horizon, pale gold, ready for harvest. A combine was working a section about 2 miles out. I could see the dust plume, but couldn't hear it. I sat there for an hour. Didn't think about track. Didn't think about defect classifications or inspection cycles or quarterly filings. I thought about nothing. And it was the strangest thing I'd felt in 26 years. That weekend, I drove Megan back to Manhattan for the fall semester. 3 hours round trip. She talked the whole way, her agricultural economics thesis, a professor she liked, a guy in her study group she didn't. I listened. Actually listened. Not the way I used to listen, with half my brain running through the next day's inspection route. The whole brain, she noticed. Didn't say anything about it, but she noticed. The following Saturday, I drove to Topeka and helped Tyler change the oil on his work truck. He's a journeyman lineman for Evergy, climbs utility poles for a living, same kind of man who works with his hands and doesn't complain about it. We lay under his truck on the concrete, passing the drain pan back and forth, not talking much. When we finished, he cracked 2 beers, and we sat on his tailgate. He looked at me sideways. "You seem different." I took a drink. "How so?" He shrugged. "You're here." He wasn't wrong. If you've ever watched someone with zero experience destroy what took decades to build, hit that like button and subscribe. The evenings were the quietest part. Carol and I on the back deck after dinner, watching the sky go dark. Sometimes she'd read. Sometimes she'd just sit. I'd pour coffee from the thermos and feel something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly. More like the absence of weight. Nothing pressing. Nowhere to be at 4:30 a.m. No rail to walk. No defects to classify. Just the wind in the wheat and the first stars coming through. I almost forgot what was coming. Almost. Meanwhile, at Great Plains, the clock was already running. Day 1 after my termination. No inspection reports filed. Day 2. None. Day 3, 4, 5, nothing. Frank Cooper did what he could. He walked sections of the Salina yard informally, checked switches, looked at tie condition. But Frank isn't FRA certified. His observations don't count in the federal compliance database. As far as the FRA's automated system was concerned, 1,100 miles of track had gone silent. Jessica's outsourced compliance vendor, a consulting firm from Chicago called Apex Rail Solutions, hadn't even started the onboarding paperwork. I looked them up later. Their website had stock photos of freight trains and a mission statement about leveraging data-driven insights for rail network optimization. They'd never inspected a rail in their lives. Their senior consultant's LinkedIn listed experience in logistics analytics and supply chain consulting. No FRA credentials, no field experience, no certification pathway that would take less than 18 months, and that was optimistic. Day 10. The first crack. A slow-speed derailment on the McPherson subdivision. 2 empty grain hoppers tipped off the rail on a curve. The same curve I'd flagged for rail replacement 4 months earlier. Gauge widening. The outside rail had shifted 3/4 of an inch beyond tolerance under summer heat expansion, and nobody had been there to catch it. No injuries, no environmental spill, just 2 hoppers on their sides in a ditch and a local FRA field inspector who drove out from Wichita to look at it. He looked. He pulled up the inspection database for that segment. Found the last filing. Mine. Dated 47 days prior. Found the defect report I'd submitted, recommending immediate rail replacement. Found Jessica's deferral email. Reallocating to rebranding initiative. He wrote it all down. Then he called the Great Plains compliance line. Got voicemail. Frank called me that night at 9 p.m. I was on the back deck. Carol had already gone inside. The McPherson curve let go, the one you wrote up in June. Silence on the line. The wind moving through the wheat. A dog barking somewhere, 3 farms over. They didn't fix it, did they? No. I exhaled. Set my coffee down on the arm of the chair. I'm sorry, Frank. I can't help you. I know. I just needed you to know. I know. He hung up. I sat there another 20 minutes. The sky was clear, full of stars, the Milky Way visible the way it only is when you're 50 miles from the nearest city. I thought about that curve. I'd walked it 100 times. I knew every tie, every joint bar, every inch of gauge on that stretch. I'd measured it with my own hands, filed the report with my own name on it, and someone who'd been in the railroad business for 5 months had decided it wasn't worth $12,000 in rail. I went inside, washed my mug, went to bed. Day 22. Jessica held an all-hands meeting in the Salina Yard office. Topic: the rebranding. New logo, new color palette, teal and charcoal. New company name: Great Plains Logistics, moving the heartland forward. New website, launching in 6 weeks. She projected the marketing budget on the wall, $1.2 million. Frank Cooper stood in the back of the room in his work boots, arms crossed, ballast dust on his jeans. He looked at that number. $1.2 million for a logo and a website. The inspection program she'd killed was $400,000. Everything he needed to know about Jessica Poole's priorities was on that screen. She never mentioned track inspection, never mentioned the McPherson derailment, never mentioned the FRA field inspector's visit. As far as she was concerned, the problem was solved, outsourced, off her dashboard. Day 30. The FRA's automated compliance database did what it was built to do. Every track segment on the Great Plains network, all 1,100 miles across 5 states, flagged as uninspected beyond the mandatory inspection cycle. Red flags across the board. The system generated the alert automatically. No human decision required. No appeal process. No phone call first. Emergency slow order. Maximum authorized speed reduced to 10 miles per hour. Network wide. Every mile. Effective immediately. 10 miles per hour. A loaded grain train that used to cross the network in 14 hours now takes 5 days. Grain elevators in Kansas and Nebraska start backing up. They can't load because they can't unload, because the trains aren't moving. Fertilizer shipments stall in Iowa. Crude oil terminals in Oklahoma sit idle. Tanker cars lined up on sidings with nowhere to go. The entire supply chain, from farm to port, seized up like an engine without oil. The phone in Jessica's glass-walled office started ringing. She didn't understand what a slow order was. She asked her analytics consultant. He didn't know either. She called Apex Rail Solutions in Chicago. They explained it was an FRA enforcement action. She asked how to fix it. They said she needed a certified track inspector to re-inspect the entire network and file updated reports. She asked how long that would take. They said they couldn't do it. They weren't certified. Then the email came. Frank Cooper was on the company-wide distribution list for a marketing thread about the rebranding launch. Someone in the design department hit reply all on a chain that went back 3 weeks, back to before my termination. Buried in the thread was an internal message from Jessica to the VP of Finance, never intended for the full company. Cantwell's department is a relic. We're not burning $400,000 a year so one man can drive around in a truck and look at dirt. He's 52. Where's he going to go? He'll take the severance and be grateful. Frank photographed the email on his phone, texted it to me with 2 words. Saw this. I was parked at the Salina Walmart, waiting for Carol to finish inside. I read the message, read the email, read it again, set the phone on the seat, stared at the parking lot for a full minute. 2 women loading groceries into a minivan, a kid chasing a cart, the flags out front snapping in the wind. Where's he going to go? I picked up the phone and called Ed Marshall. Ed is a railroad labor attorney in Kansas City. We met 20 years ago through the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Union. He's handled rail worker cases for 3 decades, knows federal railroad regulation the way I know track gauge, by feel. Roy, a pause. I was wondering when you'd call. I read him the email. He was quiet for a moment. You know, UP's regional VP called me again last week, 3rd time in 2 years, asked if you were available. I looked out the windshield. The Walmart flags were still snapping. Tell him I might be. The same day, the exact same day, Jessica's LinkedIn article went live. Lean Operations in Legacy Industries, a case study in courage. Her photo at the top, standing in front of the new teal and charcoal logo, smiling. The article described how she'd streamlined a bloated operational model and eliminated redundant legacy functions to unlock capital for brand modernization. She didn't mention track inspection, didn't mention the FRA, didn't mention my name. She posted it the same day the federal government shut her railroad down to 10 miles per hour. Day 31. The FRA launched a formal investigation. Federal inspectors out of the Kansas City regional office descended on the network. They didn't come to negotiate. They came with measuring equipment, defect classification manuals, and enforcement authority. They found the 31 Class 3 defects I documented, every one of them. Broken rail joints on the Nebraska subdivision, compromised tie plates in Oklahoma, gauge widening on the curves I'd flagged, ballast failures on grades that carried loaded crude oil trains. Every single one cross-referenced against my filed reports. Every single one matched to Jessica's deferral emails. They'd been there for months, waiting, getting worse. Every train that passed over them was a gamble that the next wheel wouldn't find the gap. Dale Stafford opened the FRA's certified letter in his office on a Wednesday morning. I know this because Frank told me later. Dale read it once, set it down, read it again. His face went the color of old paper. He called Jessica's office. We need to talk. Now. Can it wait? I'm on a call with the design agency. No, it cannot wait. He walked her through it. Emergency slow order, already in effect. Formal investigation, already underway. 31 documented Class 3 defects, each one traceable to a report she'd shelved. Potential civil penalty in the tens of millions. And the part that made the floor drop out from under her. There was no path to resuming normal operations without an FRA qualified track inspector. Apex Rail Solutions wasn't certified. Wouldn't be for 18 months at the earliest. There was no one else in the 5-state region who held the credentials. The only man who could fix this was sitting on his back deck in Salina, drinking coffee from an olive green thermos, watching the wheat. Within 2 weeks, the 3 largest grain shippers on the network, Cargill, Archer Daniels Midland, and CHS Inc., terminated their contracts. Their logistics teams had called Great Plains. They'd gotten no answers, no timeline, no plan. 5-day transit times on routes that used to take 14 hours. They couldn't move product. They couldn't wait. Combined annual volume, $1.1 billion. Gone. Dale Stafford called Roy Beckstead at his ranch outside Dodge City. I can imagine the call. Dale's voice careful, precise, the way a lawyer speaks when he knows the words are going to break something. Roy, we've lost Cargill, ADM, and CHS. The FRA penalty is going to be $47 million, and your niece fired the only man in 5 states who could have prevented all of it. Silence on the line. A long silence. The kind that lives between 2 men who both know what's been lost and can't take it back. Then Roy Beckstead, 71 years old, the man who laid the first rail on a 200-mile feeder line and built it into something that fed half the Midwest. Get her on the phone and get the FRA administrator on the line. Day 55. Roy Beckstead fired Jessica Poole during a conference call with the FRA regional administrator. I wasn't on the call. Frank told me about it later, and Dale Stafford confirmed the details when he and I crossed paths at an industry conference the following year. But the sequence is a matter of record. Beckstead had the FRA's regional administrator on the line, a man named William Hargrove, who'd overseen rail compliance in the central region for 22 years. Jessica was patched in from her office. Dale Stafford was on from his. Beckstead was at his ranch, sitting in the study, where he'd signed the original operating charter for Great Plains Shortline 40 years ago. Hargrove laid it out. The slow order would remain in effect until every mile of the network was re-inspected by a certified inspector and all Class 3 defects were remediated. The $47 million civil penalty was being processed. The FRA was considering whether to recommend suspension of Great Plains Operating Authority pending full compliance, which would mean no trains at all. Not slow trains. No trains. Jessica started talking. Something about the outsourced vendor timeline and a remediation roadmap she was developing. Hargrove cut her off. Ms. Poole, Your company has been operating 1,100 miles of federally regulated track without a qualified inspector for 55 days. You have 31 documented defects that your own former inspector flagged before his termination, every one of which was deferred under your authority. This is not a conversation about roadmaps. Silence. Then Beckstead's voice. Old. Shaking. Not with anger, with the kind of grief that comes from watching something you built with your hands die because you trusted the wrong person to hold it. Ms. Poole is no longer with this company as of this moment. I apologize to the administration for the failures under her leadership. Jessica said, Uncle Roy, this call is over for you, Jessica. Dale Stafford told me later that the line went quiet for about 4 seconds after she disconnected. Then Hargrove said simply, Mr. Beckstead, I'm sorry it came to this. And Beckstead said, so am I. 3 days later, Beckstead called me directly. I was in the garage, sharpening a mower blade on the bench grinder. October had turned to November. The Indian summer was gone. Cold now, the kind of Kansas cold that comes in flat off the plains with nothing to stop it. Carol answered the house phone, came to the garage door. It's Mr. Beckstead. I turned off the grinder, wiped my hands on a shop rag, took the phone. His voice was different from any version of it I'd heard in 26 years. Not the voice that called me son when I got my FRA certification. Not the voice that shook my hand when we hit our 10th year without a derailment. This was a man who'd been hollowed out. Roy, I need you to come back. I'll double your salary. Title. Whatever you want. I'll put it in writing today. I stood in my garage holding the phone. The mower blade was on the bench, half sharpened, catching the overhead light. Carol was in the kitchen doorway, watching me. She didn't come closer. She knew. Mr. Beckstead, I've worked for you for 26 years. I respect what you built. I paused. The wind was moving outside, rattling the garage door in its track. I could hear it through his phone, too. He was on his porch in Dodge City, the same wind crossing the same plains. But your niece called my life's work a waste of diesel, and you let her. Nothing on the line, just whined on both ends. I've accepted a position with Union Pacific. I start in 5 weeks. His exhale was the loudest sound I'd ever heard him make, a long, slow release of air that carried 40 years of work and the knowledge that it was over. I understand. A pause so long I thought the call had dropped. I'm sorry, Roy. I looked at the mower blade, at my hands, still gray with metal dust, at the garage where I'd taught Tyler to change a tire, where Megan had painted her science fair poster on the concrete floor, where I'd spent every Saturday for 27 years fixing the things that needed fixing. I know you are. Click. Day 90. I reported for duty as Vice President of Track Safety at Union Pacific's Regional Division, headquartered in Omaha. Salary, $890,000 annually. Retention and equity package, $33 million over 5 years. The offer had come through Ed Marshall within a week of my call from the Walmart parking lot. UP's regional VP, a man named Garrett Winslow, who'd been tracking my career for years, didn't negotiate. He named a number and said, "That's not a starting offer, Roy. That's what you're worth." My office has a window overlooking the largest classification yard in North America. Trains in every direction, as far as you can see. The hum of diesel and the clank of couplers, constant. The sound of freight moving the way it's supposed to. On my desk, the Stanley thermos. The hard hat with the worn Great Plains logo. I kept it, not out of sentiment, but because it fit right, and I don't see the point in breaking in a new one. And a framed photo of Megan's high school graduation, the one that spent 7 years taped to my truck dash. The adhesive residue is still on the glass. My first assignment, oversee the assessment and integration of Great Plains Shortline's abandoned routes into the Union Pacific network. The same 1,100 miles. The same curves, switches, and grade crossings I'd walked for 26 years. I knew every joint bar, every tie, every inch of gauge on every subdivision. Frank Cooper was my first hire. I called him on a Monday morning. Frank, I need a track foreman for the Central Kansas Territory. Same track, better equipment, better pay. Interested? He was quiet for about 2 seconds. When do I start? Great Plains Shortline Railroad filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy within 4 months of my termination. The $47 million FRA civil penalty, combined with the loss of $1.1 billion in annual shipping volume from the Cargill, ADM, and CHS contract terminations, and the inability to resume normal speed operations without a certified inspector, made recovery a mathematical impossibility. Dale Stafford handled the filing. He told me later it was the hardest document he'd ever prepared. The company's remaining assets, locomotives, rolling stock, maintenance equipment, rail yards, the Salina headquarters with its glass-walled COO office and teal and charcoal branding, were auctioned. Recovery, 14 cents on the dollar. Jessica Poole's LinkedIn profile was quietly changed to open to work. Her article, Lean Operations in Legacy Industries, a Case Study in Courage, is still live as of the day I'm telling you this. The comment section became something I didn't expect. Industry professionals, one after another, in precise technical language, explaining exactly what she'd destroyed and why. A retired FRA administrator from the Southwest region wrote a 3-paragraph response that ended with, "This is not a case study in courage. This is a case study in what happens when you fire the only person who understands the system and replace them with a branding budget." Last I checked, it had 4,200 likes. Roy Beckstead retired permanently, sold his ranch outside Dodge City. 40 years of building a railroad, and the last thing he signed was a liquidation agreement. Frank told me Beckstead called the office once, about a month after the filing, asked if anyone had saved the original route map. The framed one, the 200-mile feeder line that started everything. Nobody knew where it was. Jessica had taken it down. It was probably in a dumpster behind the remodeled office. I thought about that map for a long time. I'd looked at it every day for 26 years, walking past Beckstead's dispatch room. It wasn't valuable. It wasn't art. It was a pencil drawing on drafting paper in a cheap frame. But it was the thing that said, this is where it started, and this is what it became, and someone built it with their hands. Dale Stafford found work at a regional law firm in Wichita. When asked about Great Plains in interviews, he said the same thing every time. The track inspector tried to tell us. A Saturday in late spring. Clear sky, warm, the kind of day when the whole state smells like new growth. Green winter wheat coming up in the fields, 3 inches tall, bright against the dark soil. I drove my F25 down a farm road paralleling the McPherson subdivision. The same stretch where the derailment happened. The same curve I'd flagged. Union Pacific track now. New rail, new ties, fresh ballast, sharp-edged granite, pale gray in the sunlight. The UP markings on the signal posts. I pulled over onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. Got out. Walked the rail for 100 yards, the way I've done 10,000 times. Checked the gauge without thinking. Habit so deep it lives in my hands, not my head. Looked at the joint bars, the tie plates, the alignment through the curve. Everything held. Everything was right. I stood there for a minute. The wind was moving the wheat on both sides of the right-of-way. That sound like breathing, like the land itself exhaling. A meadowlark was singing from a fence post. The rail stretched out in both directions, clean and straight, disappearing into the curve I knew by heart. Carol was in the passenger seat, window down, reading a paperback. She didn't ask what I was doing. 30 years. She knows. I got back in the truck, poured coffee from the Stanley thermos, olive green, dented pour top, 28 years old. It was lukewarm. tasted the same as it always had. We drove home, windows down. The wheat coming up on both sides of the road. The horizon flat and wide and endless, the way it's always been. The way it'll always be out here. Funny thing about a railroad. You can rebrand it, restructure it, put a new logo on every car. But the rail still has to hold. And the only man who knew whether it would, she called him a waste of diesel. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and ring that notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.